Hey everyone, welcome to Awareness with Ashley. My name is Ashley Stewart. I share a first hand experience of what it's like living with idiopathic intracranial hypertension. You'll hear me call this IIH and migraines. I use my own experience to share what living with IIH and migraines is really like. Today's topic is going to get a little deep. I am going to be discussing how the fact that everything is temporary is something that you often encounter in meditation, but I want to apply it to the situation with chronic illness because I think it's something that is really beneficial and is a very important insight. And so I have some notes written down. I almost have this set up as an article, but I'm kind of hoping that I can elaborate a little bit more because I have some things I want to talk about but didn't want to write them down while I was talking about it because I don't want to make it sound like or make it look like I'm just reading off of something that I wrote. With chronic illness, you feel like you're always going to be stuck in the current situation that you're in. I feel like this is similar to bad days in high school. It feels like things will never get better or change. So you go through a breakup in high school and it feels like the world is falling apart, or you get a bad grade in school or university or whatever, and it seems like whatever happens right then is just going to be your life for the next infinite amount of time. And the truth is that it's so much deeper than that. It's not actually like that. It's actually temporary, despite the fact that it doesn't feel that way. I remember this being like this when I was younger more than anything, and particularly when you're going through rough times, it really feels like you're honestly not gonna see any improvement. You're not gonna have where things do eventually get better. And it just feels like everything's falling apart. The truth is that it does eventually improve. It does eventually get better. It may not ever reach what it was before, but at least things do tend to change. Now, some things change for the worse, but others change for the better. And the only thing that is constant throughout life, and I think throughout a journey with chronic illness, is the change. It's like life itself. It's temporary. Meditation has been able to help me discover this insight, but it's amazing at just how far this applies right across life, including to bad days with chronic illness and chronic pain itself. So it's not just the journey with chronic illness, it's the experience with the chronic pain as well. Remember this photo that I talked about with this valley and going down into a valley and then coming back up? And I think a valley is also really helpful with this particular situation because it does show that things are going to change. It does show that it's not staying the same and that things have changed. And it often takes to where you're kind of looking back at this whole journey and you're like, oh yeah, it is actually changing quite a bit. Like, it's not something that you can see kind of maybe day to day, but it's something that's kind of more week to week or month to month. I would even say you're not really going to see maybe many changes week to week. It's going to be the months and the years. There is that change that's happening, but you're not able to see it directly in the moment. You kind of do have to have those times of self-reflection in order to really see that that's actually happening. When things kind of are at the start, it's definitely rough to have all those changes because it's often a sudden amount of changes all at once. Like, you're not really given time to adjust. Depending on the chronic illness, things can maybe slowly change, but I don't know of an example where it's like that. It kind of feels like there's your life before your diagnosis and then your life afterwards. And it's not really that things are changing slowly ever, but maybe in some cases they are. I reached the toughest part in about April, May of 2019, but it slowly went there because I was actually diagnosed in 2018. So I guess there was a slow bit of a decline there, and it was just felt like I was getting, worse and worse, even though my optic nerves were actually starting to improve long before I felt when I was sickest. And it's just because there was the journey with IIH before that, and then the journey with migraines kind of overlapped. This photo here that I often mention is more the journey with the migraines. It's not really the journey with the IIH. So the IIH would have been probably kind of slowly going downhill until diagnosis, which was in September of 2018. And then from there, it started to get a little bit better over time. And so there was a bit of overlap, but because I was having to manage the acetazolamide and topiramate, there was overlap there. I guess maybe that's where I could kind of say that there's almost two valleys rather than just the one, and they overlap. It's almost like if you had two curves that overlap. No one will appear and hand you better days on a silver platter. It's something that you do have to put effort into, whether that's making lifestyle changes, like doing the necessary things to lose weight, or being stubborn about learning what your triggers are. It does take effort to do, and sometimes it takes a lot of effort. You can't just sit there and do nothing and expect things to get better. It takes some commitment on yourself. It takes some commitment in the fact that, you might have to go through some rough times in order to come out of it feeling a little bit better. And you might have to go through some challenging times, whether that be with weight loss. Weight loss is challenging, and it never continues to get easy. Like, there's always a little bit of a struggle there. It's never going to be a simple thing, and it's something that you struggle with, like, for the rest of your life. And I think people kind of only really pay attention to weight loss when you're actually losing weight. But I've said this before, and I really honestly think that the journey with weight loss itself, is just the start of the journey. It's just the start of that. And the real challenge is keeping the weight off and managing to keep the weight off. Something to remind yourself of on a bad day is this too shall pass. And you've gotten through 100% of your bad days so far. You will get through this one as well. It doesn't feel like it will pass when you experience a flare-up, but it will. This is kind of a bit of a more positive outlook on this, and when you're actually going through a flare-up, it is one of the most frustrating things to deal with, because, people are telling you, oh yeah, this too shall pass, things are going to get better eventually, especially when you deal with a chronic illness. You go through flare-ups, you go through rough challenges, and you go through rough times. During those tough times, right now, it's actually a reminder that things actually aren't perfect for me. And, that gets frustrating, and I sometimes get frustrated by the limitations that I experience. But it's a reminder that things are changing, and that I'm reminded that things will pass. And because I have things often come in cycles, because there's certain things that trigger a migraine for me, it's not so simple as to say, oh, well, this too shall pass. It's not really something that I think people should be telling someone with a chronic illness or chronic pain. Oh, this too will pass. You're going to get through this. It's going to be very much up to the person, actually, on whether they find this helpful or not. But be careful with this, I would say, because I know from me, if someone was to say this when I'm having a particularly rough time with my illness, it may not actually be the best thing. I'm just going to put that out there. I may not appreciate it in the way that you think I might. It's kind of like how I feel when someone says, oh, you're looking so good, you must be feeling better, you must be doing so well. And I would say, yeah, 95% of the time, things are fantastic. But then you've got those, 5% of the time where you still have this thing and you're still going through this thing, but no one pays attention when you're actually dealing with that thing. If you get what I'm trying to say with that. It's kind of more of a inner self talk. It's not gonna be something that stays with you forever. It could be a lengthy period of time that a flare-up occurs. That's the nature of chronic illness. Sometimes you don't understand why, or sometimes you have all the negative things that affect your illness come together in a very unfortunate set of circumstances, and you end up in a flare-up for a while. But I think there will be a time where you do eventually kind of get a little bit of a break. Now, not all chronic illnesses like that. There are illnesses that you cannot ever have a break with, But with chronic pain, this does, I think, apply to it a certain degree, especially if you found something that works a majority of the time. That frustration of trying to find a medication is one of the most frustrating things about dealing with chronic pain. And it's not just the medication, but dealing with the lifestyle factors as well. I shouldn't just stress that you gotta find a medication that works and then you'll eventually get better. No, like it's not always just a medication thing. It's sometimes addressing those social things as well and trying to push through some of those rough things in order to improve the situation and do the best you can and try to make it so that you can actually enjoy a little bit of life. Having a medication that keeps someone stable is an important thing, and I think that it's an important part, but it's not the whole story. The only thing in life that is constant is change itself. I want you guys to take a look back. Where were you at this point last year? So for me, last year, I was working a lot less than what I am right now. And I was kind of struggling because I'm at a rough time in the year. It is the fall, so the weather is changing. I don't remember where I was in my menstrual cycle at this point last year, but let's just say overall, how was I doing? Probably a little bit worse, but maybe not. Maybe I'm about the same. Maybe I'm a little bit better. I actually think, if anything, I'm better than what I used to be. And especially comparing to a couple years ago when I wasn't able to work and now I can work nearly full time. I pretty much consider myself full time, even though I'm not technically full time. I'm very, very close to it. So with that being said, I've definitely improved. There's been a massive improvement in the last few years, and I'm at a point now where I only dreamed I would be a few years ago. So are you better, worse, about the same? Like I said, I can tell you that I'm better. I actually couldn't have ever imagined that I would be able to work full time almost a couple of years ago at all. I honestly probably would have laughed and went, yeah, right, I wish, and that's my ultimate goal. So to be able to reach that kind of long-term goal of being able to maintain a full-time schedule and along with that be able to maintain still doing videos occasionally is a huge accomplishment, and I am quite honestly proud of myself for it. This, like I said, the life I have now, the reason why I don't complain as much as what I used to about really much of anything is because I'm living the life right now that I really, really wanted when I was at my worst. All I wanted was to be able to be independent, which I'm still not fully independent, but have a job, be able to maintain a schedule, and be a functioning member of society. That's all I really wanted. And it's amazing how low you set your goals when you're dealing with those really, really rough times in your life. But to be able to have achieved that, which I consider is a long-term goal, is massive to me. And it's really important to me that I've reached this point. It's a really huge accomplishment. If I look back, and honestly, probably if I was to show someone how sick I was in that April, May of 2019 when I was on the topiramate and the acetazolamide at once, I think it would be like people would give you praise for just reaching, being able to do what you do now. But they don't see that. They only see such small parts of your life that not only do you have to remind them of how far you've come, but you have to remind yourself of how far you've come at the same time. It's not until you look inwards and you really reflect on that you get an idea of, wow, I have come such a long way in the last little bit. Because it's a slow transition, I think it's harder to see. So like if something is really quick, like what happens with the diagnosis, it's really, really obvious at the change there, because it's so fast. And yet when you start to come out of it and you start to really learn how to live with something, it's such a slow transition and you adjust as you need to. So there's not that really sudden change that you're really able to see until you look and reflect on time itself. And you look back and you look upon not only weeks and months, but you look back upon the years. Like I said, I would have laughed, and also when I hope that's true because that's all I want. Like when you're dealing with a chronic illness, you do not want to be dealing with that chronic illness. You do not want to be dealing with chronic pain. You don't want to be not able to function. I don't know very many people who will sit there and go, all I want to do is lie on the couch, not be able to move, and in a ton amount of pain. I don't think that's going to be a common thing that people want. People think that, oh, you have all the time in the world, you're not working. But you're constantly fighting that pain, and you're constantly fighting the fatigue, and you're constantly fighting all of these symptoms. You're lucky to be able to just get through a few things each day, let alone do all the things that you actually need to do in order to be functional. People don't realize that until it's taken away from them. And I think we forget that. You kind of slowly forget over time how far you've come because you adjust as you need to, and you don't really think about that until it's kind of not really a problem anymore because you've adjusted to it, or you just kind of grit your teeth and bear it kind of thing. And it's really hard to describe, but I know those of you who have these conditions as well are going to get what I'm getting at with that. It's very hard to describe though to those of you who are completely healthy and have never dealt with anything, either chronic pain or chronic illness, because you haven't really experienced that. And there are honestly some things in life that I really don't think that you can really have empathy for until you experience it. You're always either going to be underestimating it or not really getting it. It's just so hard to describe. It's like describing present moment. You just can't do it. Like, there's no words for it. You just literally have to experience it in order to really fully grasp it. For those of us who are coming out of the valley of our worst times, as this picture indicates here, those of you on the podcast obviously won't be able to see this, but I may end up posting this actually because I think it's a really important photo. But for those of us who are coming out of this, I think we tend to forget because the change is often so slow. I've mentioned this earlier in the podcast and video, just how much of the things change over time, and that the life we are living, even when not perfect, could have been the life we wanted just a few short years ago when it seemed like everything was falling apart. I constantly have to remind myself of that. I don't tend to complain about my schedule anymore. I don't tend to complain about having to go to work because I know what it's like not being able to, and I know what it's like struggling to just be able to be an adult. And I know what it's like to want something so bad and not be able to do it. And until having my medication that kept me stable, and the mindfulness, meditation, lifestyle changes, everything, routine, all of it. It's a lot actually when you put it all together into a sentence. And I just have adjusted over time. And the thing I think is important too to stress is try not to make all the changes at once. I think I would tell myself, make these changes slowly, focus on one thing at a time, and not be too concerned about time itself, because if you rush it too much, you're just going to become overwhelmed and the change is going to be too much all at once, and you're going to get frustrated, and then you're not going to be successful. And although change is slow, often when you're going through that change, I think slow change is more sustainable in the long run. I've kind of started out with this one stepping stone and went to another, but I'm able to do these things, and I'm able to do a lot more than what I thought I was. You can sometimes be like given a shock, as I was talking about with the finding your limitations and what they are. Like, you may find out that your limitations don't allow you to do some of the things that you want to do. That's okay, but there will be a grieving process with that, as I talked about last week, or not last week, the week before that. My last podcast, I talked about those limitations and the grieving process that can come when you find out you want to do something, but it's beyond what your limitations are. Sometimes that's out of your control, and sometimes you just need to build up to it. The most important thing to emphasize is that everything is temporary. Everything changes. And if you're having a rough time, things often will get better. If you're struggling, things may change for the better. I mean, there's always a possibility things could get worse, but I think things tend to get better as you adjust to them. And although it's important to let family and friends know that it's not always easy to do, the reason why I talk about these negative things is because it's not always so obvious. But I think it's important to emphasize these positive things, like things do change. And something that I think I wish I understood a little bit better a couple years ago was that although it felt like it wasn't going to get better, that it actually is going to get better. I think that's where I'm going to end it for today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcasting app. It really helps get the show out there. Hope to see you again next week for our next episode. Bye, everyone.